Imagine this. Billions of dollars in international aid meant to alleviate suffering and support peace instead flows into an agency accused of enabling terrorism, perpetuating conflict, and cultivating hatred. This agency, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, is the largest single UN entity focused solely on Palestinian refugees. Yet critics say its presence does more harm than good, not only for Israel, but for the Palestinians, and that this agency is deeply implicated in sustaining violence rather than resolving it. UNRWA was created in 1950, ostensibly to support Palestinians displaced during the 1948 Arab-Israeli conflict. But today, it is the subject of scathing criticism. Rather than encouraging Palestinian self-sufficiency or integrating them into stable societies, UNRWA has entrenched a system that keeps millions in a state of dependency and resentment. This isn't just a bureaucratic issue, it's a matter of global security. So, what exactly is UNRWA? Why does it matter? And is it time to finally end its mandate? Let's start with what UNRWA actually is. Founded in the aftermath of Israel's creation, UNRWA was established to provide a temporary support for Palestinians displaced during the Arab-Israeli conflict. But it operates very differently from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR, which handles the vast majority of the world's refugee situations. The UNHCR's goal is to help refugees rebuild their lives and eventually transition to full citizenship in stable countries. UNRWA, however, does not promote resettlement. Instead, it preserves Palestinian refugee status indefinitely. A Palestinian registered with UNRWA will keep this status even if they become citizens elsewhere. Refugeehood is thus not only inherited by children, but passed on from generation to generation, keeping the refugee problem growing from an initial 700,000 to nearly 6 million today. This system has transformed what should have been a temporary relief mission into a permanent bureaucratic institution, with UNRWA deeply embedded in the Palestinian society across Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. UNRWA supporters claim it provides vital services, but critics argue it is fundamentally different from any other refugee agency, and not in a good way. UNRWA's approach isn't just unique, it's problematic. By maintaining the refugee status of Palestinians in places like Gaza for decades, UNRWA is accused of promoting a political agenda rather than improving lives. Most of the people it supports have never even lived in the towns or villages from which their ancestors fled, and yet the agency encourages them to see return as a central part of their identity. This structure sustains a powerful narrative of disenfranchisement and injustice without offering meaningful opportunities for integration or stability. UNRWA does not help Palestinians achieve citizenship in other countries, nor does it support resettlement in their current communities. Instead, it insists on a right of return that would be nearly impossible to realize without causing conflict. Critics argue that this perpetuates a mindset of waiting and blaming rather than building a future. And then there's the way UNRWA operates in places like Gaza, where its facilities are called refugee camps. But these aren't temporary tent cities. They are neighborhoods that have existed for decades, deeply interwoven into Palestinian society. The term refugee camp is almost a misnomer. It's a tool to perpetuate a political image that doesn't reflect reality. If UNRWA's mandate alone weren't controversial enough, the agency has been embroiled in allegations of supporting terrorism. Critics argue that some of the $4.5 billion spent by UN agencies in Gaza between 2014 and 2020, most of which was funneled through UNRWA, directly or indirectly helps fund groups like Hamas. Around 10% of UNRWA's 13,000 employees in Gaza are allegedly linked to terrorist organizations. Instances of Hamas storing weapons in UNRWA schools or using UNRWA facilities as rocket launching sites have been well documented. In 2008, for example, an UNRWA school principal was discovered to be a member of Islamic Jihad. He wasn't removed from his position by UNRWA, but was instead targeted by an Israeli airstrike. These incidents illustrate a deep-seated structural issue within UNRWA, which claims it doesn't discriminate based on political affiliation. But what it calls neutrality, critics argue, is actually complicity. The UN as a whole doesn't designate groups like Hamas or Hezbollah as terrorist organizations, allowing UNRWA to avoid accountability even as its staff are found to be openly supporting these groups on social media and in classrooms. Transparency is another major issue. Unlike most UN agencies, UNRWA has no independent board of directors, no external auditing process, and is not accountable to its donors. This lack of oversight makes it almost impossible for donor countries to track where their money goes or how effectively it's being used. In 2019, allegations surfaced of misconduct at the highest levels of UNRWA leadership, including sexual abuse, corruption, and nepotism. An internal report was leaked, but instead of real consequences, the scandal resulted in only temporary resignations. The problem here is obvious. Without true accountability, how can any agency ensure that its funds are being used for genuine humanitarian needs and are not fostering further instability? UNRWA regularly claims that it's on the brink of financial collapse, appealing to donor countries for emergency funds. But even with massive increases in its budget in these recent years, the agency continues issuing these appeals. Between 2021 and now, the US alone has contributed over $1 billion to UNRWA, yet the agency still reports being on the verge of running out of money. Many critics see this as evidence of unsustainable spending and a lack of genuine reform. Despite UNRWA's defenders insisting it is indispensable, alternatives do exist. The UN already has established agencies dedicated to food and medical assistance, like the World Food Programme and the World Health Organization. UNICEF and the UNHCR have long histories of providing education, shelter, and support in conflict zones. In theory, all of these agencies could take over parts of UNRWA's mandate. This isn't about cutting off aid to Palestinians. It's about redirecting funds towards agencies that have clear oversight, better accountability, and a proven track record of delivering aid without political entanglements. The World Food Programme, for example, already operates in Gaza, and the UNHCR serves millions of refugees globally with fewer staff than UNRWA. So why haven't these agencies stepped in? The answer may lie in the UN's complex politics. The Palestinian refugee narrative is deeply embedded in the UN's framework, and there is significant pressure to uphold it. But if donors demand change, there is little doubt the UN would respond. Replacing UNRWA wouldn't be easy, but it is possible. First, donor countries could push for an orderly transition where agencies like the UNHCR and World Food Programme gradually assume responsibility for services. This would allow Palestinians to receive the aid they need without the baggage of UNRWA's controversial mandate. Second, a counter-terrorism vetting process could be introduced to prevent aid funds from reaching terrorist organizations. The United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, already uses vetting systems to screen contractors and partners in areas with terror activity. The same standards could be applied to ensure that international aid truly serves humanitarian, not political, purposes. Finally, education reform would be essential. Many have pointed out that UNRWA's school textbooks and curricula often glorify violence against Israelis. Requiring educational materials that promote peace rather than hostility would be crucial to preventing future generations from growing up with a mindset rooted in conflict. To conclude, UNRWA's defenders say there's no alternative, but is that true? At a time when terrorism remains a global threat and when the October 7 massacre has reminded us of the horrific consequences of unchecked extremism, can we afford to continue funding an agency with ties to Hamas? Isn't it time to rethink a system that has created a permanent, politicized refugee population instead of offering a path to peace and stability? The answer may be that there's no choice but to change course. By transitioning away from UNRWA and demanding transparency and accountability, donor countries could finally make a real impact on the ground. Palestinian lives, and indeed lives around the world, may depend on it. After decades of controversy, corruption, and accusations of complicity in terrorism, one question remains: is it time to end UNRWA for good? This video was based on an essay by Richard Goldberg, which was published in Quillette on the 7th of February 2024. You can read it for yourself. I've linked it in the description. Thanks for watching.
If you're not familiar with Quillette, Quillette is an Australian-based online magazine that focuses on long-form analysis and cultural commentary. We are politically non-partisan, but rely on reason, science, and humanism as our guiding values. If you have similar values, I assure you that you're going to love Quillette. Please check out quillette.com where you can become a member. Until next time, I've been Zoe Booth. Thanks for watching.